I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you're standing in the middle of a bridge. But, this isn't just any bridge.
Right. Definitely not your average overpass.
No, not at all. The massive laterite and sandstone blocks beneath your feet they're 800 years old. You're standing on a structure that survived the rise and fall of an entire ancient empire.
It's honestly incredible to think about.
It really is. I mean, it weathered the relentless ravages of time. It survived a brutal modern regime. And until surprisingly recently, it bore the crushing, grinding weight of 21st century commercial truck traffic.
Yeah, it really forces you to reevaluate your definition of permanence, doesn't it? Stand there is to stand on a timeline that stretches back to antiquity, but, it still functions in the modern world.
And that intersection of the ancient and the modern is exactly what we are exploring today. We've pulled together this massive stack of firsthand travel logs, historical texts, and on-the-ground conservation reports, all centered on Cambodia.
Which is such a rich topic.
So rich. But let's be clear right up front. Today's deep dive is not, your standard tourist guide to temple hopping. We're looking at the layers of this nation through a very specific lens, which is preservation and rebirth.
Right.
We're going to unpack some ancient engineering secrets, travel to the remote jungle to meet the women protecting rare wildlife, confront a truly harrowing modern history, and finally witness a cultural renaissance that is basically rewriting the rules of global charity.
Because when you look at all this material together, a really clear picture emerges. A nation's infrastructure isn't just made of stone or concrete.
Yeah.
I mean, it's built out of its environment, its collective memory, and ultimately its people.
Exactly. So whether you're an armchair historian, a traveler looking for deeper meaning, or you're just fiercely curious about human resilience, stick around. This is going to completely change how you view a society's ability to rebuild itself.
It really is.
Let's start with that 800-year-old bridge we were just standing on. It's called Speen Praptos, or the Kampong Kode Bridge.
Right. Built during the reign of King Jayavarman VII. This was right around the late 12th or, early 13th century.
Okay.
And at the time, it wasn't just an isolated crossing. It was a vital artery in this vast royal road network that connected the entire Angkor Empire.
The sheer scale of it is just hard to wrap your head around. It spans the Chickering River, measuring 87 meters long, about 16 meters wide, and 10 meters high.
It's massive.
Yeah, and it's supported by 21 arches and 20 huge pillars with these incredible 9-headed Naga-like, these mythical serpent figures carved right into the balustrades.
It's beautiful.
It is. It's such a point of national pride that if you look at the back of a 5,000 real banknote, there it is. But here's the part that absolutely blew my mind.
What's that?
This 12th century artifact was handling modern Highway 6 traffic. We were talking about modern buses and fully loaded heavy commercial trucks driving over it every single day, all the way until 2006.
Oh, wow. 2006?
Yeah, until a bypass was finally built to save it from collapsing.
I mean, think about the engineering required for that. A bridge originally designed to handle the weight of royal elephants and, wooden ox carts, somehow possesses the structural integrity to carry modern commercial transport for decades.
I do want to unpack that engineering, though, because there's a technical detail here that caught my eye. The builders used what is called a corbelled stone arch.
Right.
They didn't use the standard Roman-style true arch, which is, what we usually picture when we think of ancient arches.
Yeah.
The kind with a keystone in the middle that distributes the weight outward.
Exact.
For anyone listening who's trying to picture a corbelled arch, it's basically like stacking books on the edge of a table. You push each book slightly further out over the edge than the one beneath it until the stacks from both sides eventually meet in the middle. It relies purely on downward compression.
It's a perfect way to visualize it. It creates a very distinct shape.
Right. It creates these very tall, narrow, slit-like openings rather than a wide, sweeping semicircle. And looking at this, my initial thought was, well, why didn't they just build a standard wide arch?
It's a fair question.
Was it just a technological blind spot for Khmer architects? Because it seems so much less efficient for letting a wide river pass through.
It is entirely natural to look at that through a modern Western lens and see a limitation or a missing piece of technology.
Right.
But if we look closer at the ecosystem of the Khmer Empire, that narrow, slit-like opening was a highly intentional feature. It wasn't a bug.
Wait, how does making a bridge harder for water to pass through become a feature?
Because it wasn't just a bridge. The Khmer Empire's survival was entirely dependent on massive irrigation reservoirs, which they called beres.
Oh, okay.
They needed to master water management to sustain their agriculture through the dry seasons. If you build a true, wide Roman arch, you get a massive open span for water to flow through freely.
Which you don't always want.
Exactly. But because a corbelled arch creates those narrow vertical slits, the bridge could easily double as a dam or a spillway.
Oh, wow. So they could just block it up.
Precisely. All they had to do was slot wooden boards down into those narrow gaps between the pillars to hold back the water.
That is wild.
Depending on the season, they could trap water for irrigation or, pull the boards up to let the monsoon floods pass. They weren't just building a bridge to cross a river. They were building a massive stone multi-tool for agricultural survival.
That is brilliant. It completely reframes how we look at ancient infrastructure. I mean, they were designing for the extremes of their specific environment.
And that idea of designing for extremes brings us to another massive preservation effort happening in Cambodia today. Except, this time, the infrastructure isn't made of laterite stone. It's living, breathing ecology.
You're talking about the World Wildlife Fund project in the Eastern Plains? The Sripak Wilderness Area Project, or SWAP, located in the Mandalkiri Protected Forest?
Yes, exactly.
And right off the bat, you have to understand the paradox of this environment. It's classified as a dry forest, which makes you think of a dusty, arid landscape. But in reality, it gets 90% of its annual rainfall in just a 7-month window from May to November.
The monsoon season there is absolute.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have an environment defined by that kind of intense seasonal extreme, you end up with an incredibly specialized, diverse array of wildlife that is, adapted to thrive in those exact conditions.
It's like a real-life Jurassic Park, just without the dinosaurs.
Pretty much.
We're talking about rare species like Eld's deer, banteng, which are these massive wild cattle leopards, and giant water birds like the Sarus crane and the giant ibis. The Sripak River alone is home to 140 different fish species.
That's incredible.
They even have a giant carp that grows to 2.5 feet long.
It's an ecological goldmine. But protecting an area that vast and that remote requires an incredible human effort. And what stands out most about the Mandalkiri project is who is actually on the ground running it.
The women. The first-hand reports from these remote camps are just striking. You have women working in some of the most demanding, isolated conditions imaginable.
Right.
Take Haisomali, for example. She's an indigenous Fanong woman. Her role is crucial because she bridges 3 completely different cultures: her own indigenous community, the Khmer majority, and her foreign conservation colleagues.
Which is no small feat.
No, and she uses that unique position to educate local communities on how to use the forest's resources sustainably.
And she is out there alongside Shrenak, a Khmer data assistant who is physically trekking deep into this dense forest, right through the middle of those torrential monsoon conditions to collect field data.
Then you have Olga Vandenpoel, an ecotourism team leader who's out there deploying camera traps, trying to track down tigers that haven't been spotted in years.
They're doing amazing work.
These women are essentially the backbone of the entire operation. They're often the ones managing these deeply remote base camps while the armed police and rangers are out on long patrols. But, I have to ask about the reality of that setup. If you're a listener imagining being dropped into a remote jungle camp, knowing there might be tigers leaving fresh tracks just outside the perimeter, isn't that incredibly dangerous? Why are these women out there alone? It feels like you'd want a heavily armed military presence guarding the perimeter, not community educators.
Well, the danger is very real, but ironically, the wildlife isn't the primary threat. Human poachers and legal hunters pose a much greater, far more unpredictable danger, especially when those armed rangers are away.
Oh, I see.
But to answer your question about why you would just militarize the forest and lock it down, that approach has historically failed. The WWF here is utilizing what is called a Southern African approach to protected area management.
How does that approach work mechanically? Because teaching someone about conservation doesn't intuitively seem like it would stop a poacher with a rifle.
The core philosophy is that conservation is impossible if it alienates the local population. If you just build a fence and put guards with guns in front of it, you turn the local community into enemies.
Right, that makes sense.
People like the ethnic Fanong have relied on this forest for generations. For example, they tap the dipterocarp trees to collect liquid resin, which is a major source of their livelihood. If you ban them from the forest, they starve, and the forest becomes a battleground.
Right. Survival is going to win out over conservation every time.
Exactly. So instead, you use the Southern African model. community-based conservation. By empowering indigenous women like Somali to lead the outreach, you're ensuring that the people who physically rely on the forest are the ones defining its sustainable future.
That's a huge paradigm shift.
It is. They teach the community how to harvest the resin without destroying the trees. They create an economy around the living forest. It shifts the dynamic from us versus them to a shared investment in the ecosystem survival.
So the people protecting the forest aren't outsiders guarding a museum. They're the locals protecting their own home. It's about preserving a way of life as much as it is about preserving the trees.
Precisely.
And that concept of preservation takes on a much heavier, much more profound weight when we look at how Cambodia preserves the memory of its recent history.
Yes. To truly understand the rebirth of this nation, we have to look directly at its darkest era, the Khmer Rouge regime from 1975 to 1979.
The physical reality of that era is preserved at the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum in Phnom Penh, which was formerly known as Security Prison 21 or S21.
Right.
It was originally a high school. In 1979, Vietnamese photojournalists entered the city and discovered what it had been turned into. It was an interrogation and extermination center where it's estimated that between 14,000 and 20,000 people were killed.
The space itself is a visceral confrontation with that history. It hasn't been sanitized. If you walk through the former school blocks today, you see the grim modifications.
Just chilling.
Block C, for instance, still has dense barbed wire strung entirely across the open front balconies. It was installed specifically to prevent desperate prisoners from committing suicide by jumping. And inside, the classrooms are subdivided into tiny, claustrophobic individual cells, roughly built out of brick or wood.
And then you step into Block D. For years, this block housed a massive map of Cambodia made entirely out of 300 actual human skulls and bones.
Yeah, that was intense.
It was eventually dismantled in 2002, and the remains were moved into glass cabinets. But for a long time, it was this shocking physical manifestation of the death toll. But what really anchors Block D today are the paintings hanging on the walls. They were painted by a man named Van Nath.
Van Nath's story is one of the most remarkable examples of human endurance you will ever encounter. Out of the roughly 20,000 people who went through S21, he is one of only a tiny handful of prisoners who survived.
Wow.
And the mechanism of his survival was his art. His skills as a painter made him useful to the regime.
They kept him alive specifically to paint portraits of Pol Pot. But the incredible part is what he did after. In late 1979, just months after he was liberated and the prison was discovered, he was asked to return.
To S21?
Yes. He voluntarily walked back into the nightmare where he was tortured so that he could paint the horrific scenes he had witnessed firsthand. He turned his memory into the permanent visual record of the atrocities.
That takes unimaginable courage.
It does. He was recently featured in an exhibition called Art of Survival, but there is a quote from him regarding the modern justice system that just, well, it stopped me in my tracks, and I think we need to talk about the cognitive dissonance it highlights.
It's a very challenging quote to process.
He compares his time in S21 to the modern conditions of the UN tribunal that was holding former Khmer Rouge leaders,
Right.
specifically Nguyen Che. Vinath said, "The prison at the Khmer Rouge court is very good. It has televisions, electricity, and mattresses."
Right.
And then he says, "At the prison where I was in handcuffs 24 hours a day with no food and no medicine." He points out the bitter irony that the architects of the genocide were complaining about their comfortable UN cells and asking for bail, while they slaughtered nearly 20,000 people at Tuol Sleng without a single trial. As an observer, how does a society even begin to process that level of cognitive dissonance?
It's an incredibly delicate balance. And it's important to look at how these exhibitions and museums function impartially. The goal of something like the Art of Survival exhibition or the Documentation Center of Cambodia displaying then and now photographs of former Khmer Rouge guards alongside their modern faces. The goal isn't to take a political stance on the efficacy of the UN tribunals.
Okay.
It's not about litigating the justice system. The objective is societal healing.
But how does staring at the face of a former guard heal anything? Doesn't it just reopen the wound?
It prevents the wound from being ignored. The organizers of these exhibitions are explicit about this. Their goal is to force an open dialogue, particularly for the younger generation.
Oh, I see.
It's very easy for a society to bury its trauma. But by bringing young and older artists together, and by displaying the faces of former cadres living normal lives today, they are forcing the public to acknowledge that this isn't some ancient abstract history. It is living memory.
Right. The people are still there.
Exactly. The neighbor you buy groceries from might have been a guard. If a society cannot speak openly about that reality, it cannot fully process the trauma. The art provides a structured, safe window to confront the past so the country can actually move forward.
It's profound that art was his only tool for survival in the prison. And now, art is the tool being used for national healing, and you really see that thread continuing today. Art isn't just about documenting tragedy anymore. It's become the actual mechanism for a magnificent cultural rebirth.
The contrast between the silence of the S-21 cells and the vibrant explosion of modern Cambodian culture is truly uplifting.
There's a non-governmental organization called Cambodian Living Arts, or CLA, that's on a mission to revive traditional music and art forms that were systematically targeted and nearly lost during the regime.
They're doing such important work.
They really are. They're finding these young, incredible talents. There's a 22-year-old named Nok Sanat, who is a former pagoda boy. He's mastering the trokmer, which is a traditional three-stringed vertical fiddle. He's already being recognized as a master musician in the making.
Oh, wow.
And then you have Bospapan. She is a 10-year-old prodigy.
Described as a coloratura soprano
Yeah.
who sings in several languages, plays guitar and violin, and literally leads her own band.
At 10 years old.
I know.
The image of this young girl standing in a gallery in Phnom Penh, singing Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind, but singing it in Khmer, it perfectly encapsulates this beautiful fusion of past, present, and future.
And that fusion is happening on a massive theatrical scale as well. There's a rock opera called Where Elephants Weep.
Oh, I read about this.
Yeah, it's a massive East meets West production that tells a love story set in the aftermath of the Khmer Rouge. It takes traditional Cambodian music and smashes it together with Western classical and rock elements. It's a bold, declarative statement that Cambodian culture isn't just surviving in a museum. It is evolving, breathing, and creating new, globally relevant art.
And as the culture evolves, the way the rest of the world interacts with Cambodia is having to evolve too, especially when it comes to international philanthropy and education.
This is a huge point.
I want to talk about an NGO called PPY because their evolution is a fascinating case study in how good intentions can sometimes go wrong and how to actually fix them.
PPY started with very simple, well-intentioned premise. Two friends decided to do a bike ride across Cambodia to raise $16,000 to build a rural school.
Right.
They were wildly successful. They ended up raising $100,000 and built a massive addition to a school, complete with solar panels and computers. But the most crucial part of their story isn't the initial success, it's what happened to the organization after.
Right. They essentially morphed into a voluntourism organization where Western tourists pay to come over, ride bikes, and do some light construction work for charity. But the reality of voluntourism on the ground can be incredibly disruptive.
Absolutely.
Take a different school mentioned in the travel logs, the Schools for Children of Cambodia, located at the Lolei Temple ruins. This school literally had to rope off its entire campus. Why? Because tourists visiting the ancient temple kept wandering right into the middle of live classrooms to snap photos of everyday Cambodian life.
It treats the local population like an exhibit. The students couldn't focus on their education because they were constantly being treated as a tourist attraction by well-meaning foreigners.
And I think we have to be honest about the psychology of voluntourism here. Think about the last time you heard someone talk about a trip like this. Isn't there a massive risk that travelers are doing this charity work more for their own ego? They want the photo op. They want to go home and say, I painted a wall in a poor village because it makes them feel good, regardless of whether the village actually needed a wall painted by an unskilled tourist.
That is the exact trap, and the founder of PPY acknowledges it openly. People like to paint something and get dirty because it provides immediate, tangible gratification. It makes the donor feel valuable.
Exactly.
But PPY recognized the harm in that power dynamic, and their evolution provides the perfect countermodel to ego-driven charity.
How did they fix the dynamic?
They completely inverted the relationship. Instead of letting tourists fly in, hammer some nails, and leave feeling like saviors, PPY now requires their riders to learn from the local kids.
Oh, I love that.
The children are the ones who lead the lessons on Cambodian culture, history, and language for the visiting volunteers. It flips the script. It moves away from a model of charity, which is inherently patronizing, to a model of reciprocal learning and sustainable empowerment.
So the kids become the authority figures in the room.
Precisely. And the impact on the student's psychology is profound. Before this shift, when you asked the local kids what they wanted to be when they grew up, most would say they wanted to be shop owners.
Okay.
But after being exposed to this reciprocal learning model where they act as educators to foreigners, Many now say they want to become teachers themselves. It completely expands their horizon of what is possible.
They aren't just receiving a building, they're finding their own voices. Which really brings us full circle on everything we've talked about today. We've covered an immense amount of ground.
We really have.
We started by standing on a 12th century stone bridge where ancient engineers used the physics of corbelled arches not just to cross a river, but to build a dam that ensured their agricultural survival. We ventured into the remote monsoon-drenched forests of Mondulkiri to understand how empowering indigenous women is the only true way to protect an ecosystem. We walked the harrowing halls of S21, confronting a dark history that was meticulously preserved through the brave, agonizing brushstrokes of Van Nath. And finally, we listened to the uplifting sounds of a 10-year-old prodigy singing in Phnom Penh and witnessed a new model of global connection that prioritizes respect over ego.
It is a remarkable trajectory of resilience. From preserving physical stones to fostering a vibrant societal rebirth, it's a testament to a nation that absolutely refuses to be defined solely by the tragedies of its past.
It leaves you with something very profound to chew on. We started this deep dive talking about Speen Praptos, a literal stone bridge built to connect an ancient empire. But the bridges being built in Cambodia today aren't made of laterite and sandstone.
No, they aren't.
They are made of traditional three-stringed fiddles, remote camera traps, and paint on canvas. And it makes you look at the rest of the world and wonder how many other cultures out there have their own Danath or their own Nuxanat. People quietly holding the keys to their civilization's survival, just waiting for someone to stop, listen, and learn.
That is exactly the question we should all be asking ourselves.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those questions and keep exploring the world beneath the surface. We'll see you next time.